For a game with a selection of upwards of 170 champions, more if you factor visual gameplay updates as separate releases, there's bound to be some that just don't turn out all that great. Some champions have too niche or unintuitive a playstyle that it puts them in a state of permanent obscurity, while others end up causing so many problems for the game balance or experience-wise that the lesser evil would be to simply keep them in a perpetual state of underperformance, considering the alternative is oppressive dominance at the expense of player enjoyment. Fortunately, unlike other games, League has the benefit of constant balance and updating to lean back on. Questionable as some of their design choices may be, throughout history a number of champions have been reworked and or fixed up to feel more satisfying to play, while at the same time giving opponents ample opportunity to look for ways to respond against them. Sadly, however, the speed at which champions fail exceeds the rate at which the balance and champion concept teams are willing and or able to mend them. A few years ago I talked about what determines if a champion is a success or a failure, and I feel like it's worth taking a look into it again, but this time listing a couple new examples. So for today we'll be looking through a number of failed champions to find out what went wrong with them and how they can potentially be corrected. Before we go any further, however, I want to ask you guys a question. In your opinion, do you believe the ideal scenario would be for all champions in League to find some semblance of moderate usage, or do you think it's perfectly normal for some champions to naturally be obscure and unpopular? Let me know in the comments down below. If you ask me, I don't think it's necessarily a good thing for champions to be unpopular in a competitive game, but at the same time, it's inevitable. Players do have a natural inclination towards particular playstyles. Obviously, the cool, edgy 1v9 champions like Viego, Ambessa, and Aatrox are gonna find more success than Trundle or Sejuani. But that doesn't mean you should just make every character look and play like them. Part of what gave League its charm back in the day was how you could have a demon that could grow to the size of planets and likewise eat them, stand next to a literal child who stands next to a blob of sentient goo, who stands next to a talking hamster carrying explosive fungi. That being said, they should at least try their best to allow every champion some amount of success, or at the very least make them feel good to play and tolerable to play against when they are picked. Unfortunately, that's not everyone. What determines if a champion's a failure then? Is it based on pick rate, or is it based on how tumultuous their balance history is? Is a champion a failure based on the number of players who hate them even if they're popular picks, or is it based on a low win rate? It could be a number of factors, and the answer of course varies from one to another. In light of there being many factors as to why a cast member could be interpreted as a failure, just as a disclaimer, this is mostly my opinion. Let's start nice and easy with a pick that shouldn't be too controversial to fit in this video. Yorick. Yorick has by far one of the most curious playstyles out of any champion in the game, being the only true dedicated member of the summoner archetype. The majority of his kit, and likewise his pressure, is derived from his summons, not his own person, with the gist of his gameplay being to overwhelm his opponents through sheer pack size, coalescing his personal DPS with the help of his ultimate summon and 4 ghouls. Done properly, Yorick has enough pressure to outduel just about any champion in the game, especially if they don't have an easy way of dismantling his ghouls like Aurelius Q. Countless clips and compilations all over YouTube and Reddit demonstrate the sheer what the f potential of a 6-item lethality Yorick or even a 6-item regular Yorick tossing a single morning mist onto a squishy target and then yeeting his ghouls at them for a literal one-shot, or how he can just stat check the hell out of most champions in the right circumstances. The hard part's actually getting to that point and consistently getting to that point. The biggest reason why Yorick has struggled to find any measure of success even after getting reworked is that his very existence goes against the fundamental rule of player enjoyment in video games, agency, namely that he doesn't really give the player that much agency. While a legitimate mechanic, as evident by the number of different champions that have one, summons are poorly implemented in League. You can learn more about that in my video on the subject if you're interested. Other games might allow for better control and skill expression through an external source, but League is not one of those games. For a champion to be designed around such a flawed system and depend so much on it, Yorick's performance can wildly fluctuate, typically for the worse. The only way to actively control his ghouls is through Morning Mist, a skill shot that, despite having surprisingly good range, can be tricky to land constantly. Outside of that, you're essentially attempting to control an army of mindless drones that attack anything that moves, not quite the set of tools conducive to lasting success. As a result of how difficult and unwieldy he can be to operate in a practical combat setting most of the time, Yorick ends up defaulting to split pushing, where he doesn't need to worry about anything going wrong. Split pushing as a win condition also happens to be highly circumstantial, forcing you to depend on your teammate's ability to buy you enough time to establish a split push and the enemy team's inability to fight against one. As such, even in moments where Yorick might be strong, his impracticality and dependence on too many uncontrollable variables ends up being a massive turnoff to most players, resulting in quite possibly the lowest amount of success out of any post-VGU champion in Diamond Plus. Although to be fair, I'd be remiss to not at least give mention to his dominance in low elo. Down in the depths of Silver and Bronze, Yorick happens to be one of the strongest champions in the game, owing to game times on average being longer down there and players being far less capable of handling his strange playstyle. Basically, Yorick's performance and popularity are directly tied to being a matchup check, nothing more, nothing less. Personally, I consider that to be grounds for a veiled champion, when success or failure lies not in you being good, but your opponents being bad. Next champion I want to go over is Kalista. Consistently one of the least played AD carries in the game, her legacy has been cemented as a champion meant exclusively for pro play or for dual Q boosters alongside a Thresh 1-trick or something. What makes her all the more perplexing is that from a surface glance, her kit would give off the impression that she would be extremely popular. The crux of her gameplay is housed in a unique passive, Martial Poise, wherein you can buffer a dash in every target direction between auto attacks, giving her potentially the highest combat mobility out of any marksman in the game. How could she not look appealing when she literally has Vayne's Tumble for her passive? Not the bonus damage though, mind you. The downside of auto attacking for all champions is that you do have to stand in place to attack, which means if someone's chasing after you, or you're chasing after them, assuming the two of you had the same movement speed, they would eventually be able to catch up to you or eventually run away from you. That's what makes attack moving so essential. Kalista was a champion who could kite or chase while attacking. Also taking into account her Ren's ability to stack practically indefinitely, I say practically, yes I know the 255 spear limit, she could attack you non-stop and then pretty much execute you once you had enough spears in you. This also worked on non-champions, effectively turning Kalista's E into a pseudo smite. You could stack 5 dozen spears on Baron, then rip all of them for 2000 damage at once. An AD carry who can attack move and execute objectives better than even smite sounds like a dream come true, right? It was. For a time. She was an absolute menace in pro play, especially when you included Fate's Call, turning her support into a Malphite ultimate. In fact, her presence in pro play was so dominant, they basically had to turn her into an always weak champion. Again, I have a video on that if you want to learn more. Putting it simply though, Kalista is a champion that has to be kept intentionally underpowered purely for the sake of not making her a big ban in pro play, which had a knock-on effect on the champion in solo queue. Her extreme reliance on a team already made her inconsistent, but with the way Martial Poise was designed, she ironically is one of the easiest ADCs to lock down, contrary to what its premise might suggest. Because her dash is contingent on her attack speed as well as movement speed, anything that were to slow down either would completely shut down Martial Poise. Yes, you can make Kalista slower by taking Frozen Heart. So much of her power budget is funneled into her passive and ultimate that the rest of her kit had to be made extremely underwhelming to counterbalance it. But then they made tapping into the full extent of either of them so prohibitively difficult by making Martial Poise even easier to shut down than a basic dash ability like Vayne's Tumble, and then making Fate's Call dependent on your Oathsworn knowing exactly when you were going to use it, and you knowing exactly what your Oathsworn wants to do with it. Altogether, Riot had to nerf Kalista to the ground and then leave her there since conceptually her kit was just way too overpowered for a game so dependent on positioning and macro mechanics. At one point, they even had to make it so her auto attacks passively only did 90% of her AD to compensate for her insane potential mobility. So far, we talked about a champion that could be considered a failure due to how impractical they are to play, and then a champion who is too practical to be allowed to play. Both examples pertain to something fundamentally wrong with their gameplay. But I want to talk about one more example that has less to do with applicable usability and more about design fantasy, since I feel like it's also worth giving some credit to. Naafiri. Funnily enough, at the time of writing this, Riot August gave announcement that Naafiri was getting a mid-scope, which, assuming I upload this around mid-March, should already be out on live servers. When I made Why No One Plays Naafiri back in autumn of last year, I feel like the part everyone mostly came together in agreement on was how they missed the mark on her gameplay fantasy of being an assassin, namely that she doesn't feel like one at all. Like Yorick, Naafiri was intended to deliver on the motif of overwhelming her enemies through sheer pack size, exactly like a pack of wolves dogpiling on their opponent and ripping them to shreds. While technically they stuck the landing on that front, it doesn't end up feeling that way. Unlike Yorick, Naafiri's dogs are much easier to manipulate thanks to her auto attacks, Q, and W, giving her several ways to lock onto enemy champions, and from a rushdown perspective, combining the tempo increase from her ultimate and the point-and-click dash on her Hound's Pursuit makes for a decent engage. The problem is that everything they built Naafiri up to be has nothing to do with what she actually became. For starters, Naafiri's a Darkin champion. What are Darkin champions known for? High sustained damage in teamfights and huge amounts of battle healing. Aatrox and Rust both meet this criteria. They're all about dishing out tons of DPS and healing equally as much. When they tried to conceptualize Naafiri as an assassin, I wasn't sure how they could implement the Darkin themes without making her extremely toxic to play against. Turns out they didn't, they just made her more into a diver champion, except that made her neither a Darkin nor an assassin. Naafiri can assassinate, don't get me wrong, but her old kit lacked the fundamental tools you'd find on an assassin like high evasion, blinding speed, and whatnot. Now I say that as they're about to give her on-demand on-target ability, so maybe I should be careful what I wish for. Anyway, she comes off more like a pursuit type champion like Olaf and Nocturne and less of a one-shotter like Talon and Kiana. Except even on that front, her engage doesn't feel too good, but that's because that was not her intended niche. In essence, when they released Naafiri, they had in mind to follow the running ideas of a Darkin champion and an assassin, two conflicting elements. Sustained TPS and battle healing are the last things you want to give to an assassin, understandably so. That would mean they have no weaknesses, so they kind of haphazardly gave her a tiny bit of both, but not enough to fully capture the essence of either. Failure number 1. Because she feels like an inferior version of either a Darkin raid boss or a proper AD assassin, Naafiri ends up usually playing more like an awkward mixture of a bruiser diver assassin, except she feels really lousy as a diver compared to an actual diver like Hecarim or J4, naturally. In other words, they forced her into a playstyle that wasn't part of her original intent, causing her to feel like a champion without a meaningful purpose. Failure number 2, hence why they're giving her a mid-scope update less than 2 years after she came out. That might be the fastest a champion ever had to get a mid-scope in history. So as you can see, there are multiple ways in which a champion can be interpreted as a failure. They could be a failure from the perspective of feeling really bad to play. They could be a failure from the perspective of being so strong on paper they have to intentionally be kept weak. And they could be a failure from the perspective of poor champion conceptualization. There does tend to be a correlation between pick rate or lack thereof and champion success, but I don't think it encapsulates everyone. For instance, Ivern's a pretty well-made champion in my book. He might be a bit of a nuisance to deal with, and he certainly has the most unorthodox kit for a champion meant to be played in the jungle, but I feel like he sells the premise of what they wanted him to be quite well. That being said, his over-dependence on teammates and poor solo pressure might contradict the expectations of a jungler being self-sufficient and being the one teammates can depend on, not the other way around. The cutoff line between a champion being just quirky and a champion being poorly made has always been hard to pinpoint, and with the game being constantly updated every 2 weeks, a once obscure champion can become popular overnight. All it takes for a 0% pick rate champion to become instant pick ban is for Riot to just pump up their numbers like crazy. So I don't believe it's wise to judge one's success or failure on the basis of pick rate. That is, not unless of course they had a long history of being irrelevant. On the flip side, could a champion be deemed a failure if they had too high of a pick and ban rate? An interesting case study just so happened to appear recently, Mel Medarda. Despite having a very straightforward and intuitive kit as well as it being frankly not all that strong, especially after getting nerfed a billion times, Mel has been sitting at a ban rate of 50% in Diamond Plus as of early March. What's even more amazing is that she has a win rate of only 45%, possibly the highest ban rate on a champion that wins only 45 out of 100 games. I would expect a ban rate like that to be on a champion with a 55% win rate, not 45. But why is that? Many players might be target banning her mainly as a result of wanting to avoid any possibility of her W screwing over their entire game plan. Perfectly understandable. Another faction might be banning her not out of concern for her being on the enemy team, but her being on their team. Having a champion with a win rate that low on your team doesn't exactly make you feel confident, does it? Whatever the reason, it's clear there's something very wrong with Mel's design for her to have one of the worst collective win rates in the game and yet have a ban rate so high. She's being banned practically on site despite being underpowered, meaning there's something fundamentally wrong with her that goes beyond power. So while she might not be a commercial failure, an argument can be made that she's a design failure or a failure in the sense of being a balanced nightmare. There are many ways to interpret it. For my money, I would say objective failures are champions who cause excessive frustration and who feel unsatisfying to play whether they have a 46% win rate or a 54% win rate. It all boils down to experience at the end of the day. If the experience is rewarding to play and engaging to fight against, then everything else doesn't really matter much. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with my thought process on what makes a champion a failure, or do you think it might be something else? You're welcome to share in the comments, and also don't forget the other question I asked at the beginning. For now though, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you love to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other champion discussion videos if you haven't yet. Until next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.